Hi, everyone. Jason with Do You Know Drones back at you again. I have another amazing innovator that I really want you to meet. That was 3 reallys. This is a big deal. I was enthralled with a conversation that I had with him earlier this week. So please welcome to the stage. I have Orlando Saez, the founder, engineer, CEO, and brain trust at Aker Technologies. Orlando, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I found some interesting information about you on the internet. All good stuff, I promise. But this is a good segue. I really want to understand, who is this guy? I really need to know. Drones, soybeans, farm, and yoga. There's a story here. I did read the article, and we'll leave a link down in the description. But I really want to hear your story. So Orlando, over to you. Let's tell the listeners all about you, how this came into being, a little bit about your history. Love to hear more.
This is scary that you're digging stuff in the internet. There's a lot out there. But anyways, I appreciate this. So Orlando Saez, co-founder and CEO of Aker. I stand on the shoulders of a very good team. I started my career as a software engineer in the telecommunications space. I've been a C-level executive in 2 companies that went public. About 6 years ago, my curiosity led me to agriculture. 2 inputs to that. One is I love cooking, and I'm always conflicted and concerned and motivated to know the source of food and where it comes from, and connecting with agriculture was something important related to cooking. And the second thing is I love nature. And I think to your point in the article, I traded a data room, fluorescent lighting for sunlight, and I never looked back. So I'm a yogi. I like nature and being connected in the way that I have now. It's actually amazing. So that's the main background of that crazy article that you read.
So where did I understand the inspiration, and I very much appreciate the inspiration as well. I think reconnecting with nature is a huge thing that I'm trying to teach my children for now. That their idea of camping is in the backyard. That's not the same. If there's not their house a few feet away, it's going to be really hard to get them to go there, to put their devices down. So I think for a generation that's sort of looking for a combination of technology and nature, I think this fits really nicely. So when we spoke last, you were telling me that you spent a lot of time on a farm, and that led to some inspiration behind the current technology at Aker Technologies. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that came to be?
Yeah, so let me correct this point, which is I didn't spend enough time in a farm. You can spend a lifetime in the farm and not learn enough, but I lived in a farm for several years in southern Minnesota, Winnebago, Minnesota, where I met a very progressive farmer, and he was the co-founder of Aker, who's a fantastic farmer. And in knowing him and the opportunity at hand, a lot of what growers are conflicted is the source of truth for understanding what disease, pests, biotic and abiotic stressors are affecting their yield. The way that farmers operate is that it's a perfect score when you buy the seed, and what you have to do is protect it against environmental stressors and pathogens and other things, so that at the end of the rainbow, you can harvest as much yield potential as you can obtain from that season. And part of what I did learning about farming with my co-founder, he gave me a clipboard and said, get out there and find, diseases and pests. And the way that people do this in farming is walking the fields, is crop scouting or ground truthing. Believe me, walking fields is glamorous at first, but after you do it a handful of times in the bare sun in August and you're walking through 15-inch corn, that's not glamorous. And that's where we said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And we essentially attach what it amounts to a selfie stick to a DJI Phantom drone. And this is now, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And we put a whole bunch of cameras at the end. And that's where we said, okay, yeah. And that's where we said, hey, we found something interesting here. that I know that we can do. That you're showing on our website is obviously our product version of that now. But back then it was kind of like a PVC and a whole bunch of interesting stuff that we bought
I
off the
love it.
shelf. And we ran into the patent office. We figured this has not been patented. We patented, and more importantly, we started looking at use cases of how could this technology be meaningful to improve crop outcomes for growers. And 4 years later, we're here.
That is impressive. So I do want to dive more into this Aker TrueCause. This is a bit of a revolutionary. So a little bit more about my background for the listeners. I haven't really talked about my ag background a whole bunch. So this is really fun for me that when I was at Precision Hawk, and even before that, when I was working with Native American communities and farmers as well, in the satellite imaging side, when drones came to be, that was sort of the number one use case. And it's starting to come back now. So I'm very happy to see that. But I've walked the fields with clipboards, with scientists that are doing trials. It is mind-numbing. And I could not imagine doing that all summer long. So they're having a hard time even just finding interns to do it. And they're paying them fairly well, let alone a scientist. That's a whole nother thing. But I love the fact that this technology is looking both above with a multispectral camera and below. As the growing season starts, as soon as it gets, the corn gets knee high, good luck, getting ready to see anything. And as it starts to get to those later growth stages, having something that can see underneath, because the thing that remote sensing from above, from native remote sensing, you can't see underneath the leaf. There's a lot going on. A lot of shade, a lot of diseases, a lot of pressures, a lot of things that we just can't see. Weed pressure you can't see anymore. You can't see all these other pressures. So this technology, I'm excited about it. I saw this and was like, wait a minute. So you're saying you're dangling a very advanced sensor underneath another advanced sensor, and this new technology is actually driving the show? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so when we invented this technology, we didn't know what we signed ourselves to do, right? It's very simple to imagine something, and then it's a totally different story to make it happen. And so the invention is it's simple and imagining things, but our probe, what it does is basically takes pictures and environmental measurements. So it's kind of like a 2-pound set of sensors all dangling and tether into the drone. And the innovation here is having the camera and the sensor essentially pilot the z-axis of the drone as it's penetrating into the canopy of the crop, so that it knows when we're at tassel and where we're at grain, where we're in the stalk. That is important because when an agronomist goes out to the field, they go to observe specific things. It's like finding Waldo. You don't go just to find nothing. You go with a specific hypothesis of what you're trying to scout for, whether it's disease, insect at the beginning, disease later in the season. So there's some very specific use cases that you have to incorporate. And what we did is we program into the probe the navigation aspect to actually fly the drone in a smart way to dip into the canopy in a unique way. And then the rest is kind of how do we do that in terms of a service model. But that's the basic of the technology. The probe is flying the drone, and we think that's unique, and that's something that can replace humans from walking and doing a lot cheaper.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing. The amount of trialing that I've seen in drones flying over, just the use case by itself has already proven itself. This additional added value aspect of it just kind of changes it as you go along, especially as the canopy starts to close. And if you take it out of a trialing environment, and you're putting it into a production environment, I mean, almost all bets are off. At that point, this technology is absolutely needed. So I want to dive just one more layer deeper. So I have a lot of drone pilots, drone service providers that watch this show. How do they work with you? What is your current business model? Like whatever you can share. I don't want to dive too deep and share secret sauce, but how does the industry work with Aker Technologies?
Well, we're trying to make it easy to actually have this technology to be as self-sufficient as possible. So from a technology perspective, think of this as a Roomba vacuum cleaner. So you program in the boundaries, you send it out there, whether it's 2.5 acre grid pattern, which is kind of the precision ag template, or Inform, we use a satellite image and we send it directed scouting to specific points. The pilot doesn't really need to know. This is more for the agronomist. It gets loaded into the system before they get out the field, so that it's more just, get the batteries, make sure that you have your 107, qualify the environment, and then let it rip. And then when it comes back, it's all integrated and seamless as possible to do the extraction, the metadata, the machine learning, and the insights from there. The way that we operate with pilots is our model is a fee for service primarily, and we get hired not by the grower, but it's really the chemical manufacturers hire us to manage either their on-farm trial, to demonstrate product performance in the field for different crop protection products, whether it's fungicides, biologicals, herbicide, etc. And we do mapping missions for them. Like you said, this drone integrates both above and below canopy. So we do your typical RGB, multispectral sensor, as well as under the canopy. And our pilots just become part of an extension of our business. And so we deploy them throughout the country. They're seasonal contractors. We provide them with our equipment, and we give them jobs. It's like an Uber or Lyft driver. We have a logistic infrastructure in the back end that dispatch, trains, and onboard all the pilots, and you can upload the data. And it's very seamless. And this is our second year. So like everything, we're still working the kinks out of the system to make it as seamless and as easy as possible for our pilots. And if we do that for the pilots and it's seamless and easy and safe, it's going to be a lot more efficient and valuable for our customers.
Absolutely. So I'm going to jump to the data side, because that's where I love to live. I love to live. I talk about data constantly. I'm sure my fiance loves the fact that I talk about data all the time. She just tunes me out. Totally okay. I'm going to keep talking anyway. So on the data side, the thing that's fascinating about me is, like, you've made it seamless for the pilot. Your end customer, like you said, is the seed co, the chemical company. How does that data get delivered back to them, and what decisions are they making when they receive it?
Yeah, so there is a handful of steps in the process. The first one is the collection, as we've been talking, right? And we collect raw data, and that raw data comes in the form of JPEG images, because there are RGB images that are taken under the canopy, and it has 3 cameras that are dialing in on anything that the eye can see, basically 360. And then we have environmental sensors, CO2, O2, temperature, humidity, all kinds of interesting things that agronomists love to geek out about. And all that is your reference. It gets collected. We aggregate that. The first thing that we have to do is discriminate what we see in the image. And for that, we use good old machine learning with training sets to be able to discriminate and extract metadata from the photos associated with the pattern that we see. And we observe everything that is important to growers, which is fertility deficiencies, disease, abiotic stressors like insect, water, lodging, nitrogen, etc. Everything that the customer wants. So we deliver to our customers the raw data and also the metadata extracted from that, and any other analysis that they would like for us to do. Ultimately, we're not a destination for any of our customers. We are kind of like a step in the journey of the data. Our data lives in the dashboard of the customers that we work with. We're just a good partner to be able to get the source of truth from the field, analyze it, and make sense of what's meaningful to be able to characterize product performance, whether it's working, what is not working often, and why. So we are kind of like the story behind how this product is working in the field, and the data that we articulate is the vocabulary building block to be able to tell that story better.
I love that, because absolutely, this is all about what we're doing right here. We're telling a story. Telling a story with the data, there's not enough. I have a friend that I have at Clubhouse. She is known as the data monger. Her name is Bonnie McLean. Like, it is about making sense of the data. It is truly about making sense of the data. And the value, because I've heard this before, right? Picture's worth 1,000 words. Map is worth 1,000 pictures. The story goes on, right? As far as you go down to the insight chain. My question, and a little bit of a pivot, like, is this a service that an actual, so let's call it, I was actually extremely surprised when I started working with agriculture, precision agriculture. Farmers are one of the most technologically advanced people that I've actually met. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I certainly didn't know that. Is this a service that potentially you're thinking about crosswalking over to production ag by itself?
We do. I mean, it's a data service now. We do see a path where we will integrate our drone and have it as a product for primarily retailers or ag consultants that they do a fair amount of scouting themselves, and this is a way for them to multiply and amplify the productivity of field so that they can manage more acres. At the end of the day, for growers are technologically savvy, as you said, but they're very smart about kind of like giving the ROI. And one of the things that we learned early on in our process is growers buy solutions. They don't buy data. Data doesn't solve problems for them. So for us to go in, it's like you going to a grower and said, hey, I have a lot of bad news for you, and asking for them to pay for that. They're not going to do that. They're looking for solutions. So really, our data has to translate into some form of crop protection input, some performance. The data itself by itself doesn't deliver the value. And we learned that early on. And this is why we endear or adopted our philosophy of when we fly with a purpose. We don't fly just because we're going to find out what's happening out there. There's a specific use case that we fly for, and that use case is already something that the grower cares to solve, whether it's to understand the timing of the fungicide, what soil types are working for different types of crop management practices, whether their emergence variability is right for what they did, or where they have water. And so we're very specific, but we don't see the growers buying the data by itself. It's our data plus the what do I do about it? There's got to be the answer to the so what. And that's where we put a lot of energy to actually work with our partners for that.
Another potential use case that I'm assuming perhaps you guys have went down would be crop insurance and crop damage. Is that something that you guys are also taking a look at? A very specific purpose?
Yeah, there is. I mean, anything. So think about how much we do today in fields that requires, whether it's compliance, which is kind of the use case that you're talking about. Anything that is compliance requires validation. We think that there is a journey there related to that in a big way. There is a lot of alternative technologies, and you mentioned this earlier. You can fly with airplanes, you can fly with satellite, and it tells you a lot. The challenge is satellite and airplanes do not tell you the causality of what's going on. If you need confirmation, somebody has to do the dirty work of actually putting the boots and getting muddy and getting out there. That's what we do, but we automate that process. So if it's actually a matter of insurance for discrimination of a claim or confirmation of it, or even to assess something before and be proactive before something happens and understand what can be related to these programs that are assurance or outcome-based pricing, they need to have a risk adjustment measurement associated with the certification that product is going to do what it's meant to do. And I think we're exploring that. The other market that it's becoming a little more interesting, especially under this administration, is the element of carbon sequestration and what forms of measurements could be able to create better market value for the growers to have more residual on their practices of being a good farmer and actually having more sustainability adopted into their farm practices. So all of that is part of what we're in broad conversations around, and we're taking it one at a time and seeing where our technology has a utility.
I think it's wonderful. The use cases here, I can see just based on what I've done in the past are just explosive. Like there's so many things that we could do with this technology. I like the fact, and I've taught remote sensing classes before, and any good remote sensing instructor will always say, look, you were learning something about an object without being in direct contact with that object. You always have to ground truth. There's smart ways to do it, but there's accuracy implications, there's action implications, but you're always gonna have to do it. Like I did a class on just the NDVI, right? NDVI doesn't actually by itself tells us nothing, absolutely nothing. Has to be confirmed in the field. This is that confirmation that has been a big gap, starting way back when satellite imaging became the way, supposedly. And that's the thing, satellite imaging, it kind of caught on, but not really. You can indicate some trends, but besides that, there's really a whole lot. When it comes down to implementation, there's very little you can do. Then drones come on the scene. Do a little bit more with different sensors, LiDAR, multispectral, hyperspectral. You can start to do a little bit more, but you still need to go to the field to test something. And that is the gap that I think this company, Aker Technologies, is jumping successfully. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm very excited to see where it goes, simply because I think there's huge opportunities worldwide for this type of technology, because people, listeners, you may not know, trialing agriculture is everywhere. It's in every country, and with different crops and different different pressures, different pests, different diseases. There's so much to learn, and there's massive bodies of knowledge. And I think there's an opportunity in just collecting this information, so that you'd be a little bit like, and I can see this, a little bit of like the Google or the Amazon of, and there's there's other companies that have attempted this, but not in the same way, of having all of this machine learning data, having it all ready for deep learning and other technologies. I think that by itself is its own play. Just throwing it out there, leaving that right there on the table, because I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, and if I can add, Jason, it's like we're in a very unique time and place in agriculture where we see value in all of these different data sets, whether satellite, whatever comes from the on-farm data from the combine and the planters and all this. I subscribe to the idea that the winning formula is not any one data set, including our own. Our data set in a vacuum doesn't solve anything. It's how easy you can integrate and interoperate all these data sets in unique ways that can actually have meaningful insight for the customer, or the value that is trying to derive. And I think that this is where you have an enormous amount of innovation going into this space. And so it's not about more data, it's about really intersecting all these point solutions, and we're a point solution as well, that fits into an end-to-end spectrum with good value. And it's a unique time, and in agriculture, we're delighted to be part of this journey. I mean, I could have never imagined that 6 years ago, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do instead of telecommunications, I would hang out and do this. It's completely different. I am equally excited about the diversity of people that are jumping into agriculture from non-ag, and how people are selecting themselves, particularly people like you, and that were not necessarily in the space and being more focused in agriculture. That's a big reward, to actually have more talent in agriculture that normally prefers to be in the coast and doing other things like mobile apps and fancy consumer apps, as opposed to something in agriculture, which is something that it touches every one of us.
I just want to thank you so much. There's been so much information shared here in just a very short period of time. I highly recommend everyone to go check out Aker Technologies, check them out on LinkedIn, check out their website. I'm going to leave a bunch of links down in the description. Orlando, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been eye-opening, and I love the innovator mindset. I think it's something that there's not enough highlighting it. There's a lot of like fast-moving parts, and just you have to think more holistically. And I love just having these conversations, because I never know where they're going to go, and that's the fun part about it. And I hope the listeners like it too. So Orlando, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you everyone for joining us as well. Once again, this is Jason Sansucci. We're going to keep doing these innovator interviews. I love doing them. I see that you like them as well. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'm putting out new content constantly. Thank you again so much. I hope you have a great week. Bye now.